Hi guys, welcome back to another video. I'm Helen from Crafty So and So, and on this channel I like to make helpful sewing tips, beginner sewing tips and nice little sew alongs so you can learn something new. So today I'm doing something a little different. I've been saying recently about all these different things that how I learnt to sew, where I learnt to sew, and my biggest learning curve ever was when I went to university and studied to become a costume degree student. So that was where I really learned all my sewing skills and where I learned most of what I know today. So something you might want to know is the course I did is no longer available. It's no longer a course you can take, but it was at Scarborough College and it was by 3 tutors, and it was formerly known as Historical and Performance Costume for Stage and Screen. So that included making performance costumes, things like Cirque du Soleil, more imaginative costumes, and then the historical part was obviously things like Bridgerton or Downton Abbey and more like period drama style things. So if you don't already know, obviously costume making is completely different to fashion. There is some things that overlap, of course, there always will be, but they are very different things. And originally I wanted to go into fashion. I was told it wasn't a career that I would do well in or even get close to, so it was something I was quickly told by the careers counsellor at my high school that wasn't a viable path for me to go down, so I changed my mind. I then wanted to become a midwife, and then I was told that I didn't have enough good grades in science, so then that was also a dream that kind of died. And obviously at the age of 16 you don't realise that you can still go and try and do better at science to become a midwife. So at the time I decided to go to college and do a production course, which was hair, makeup and costume. So that was my first real taste into costume itself. There was a pair of trousers I made for a dance routine, and other than that I didn't really do that much. I did prop making and I did hair and I did costume, but I loved the theatre style. I loved being backstage and the buzz and all that kind of thing. So that was where I started to look for university. So when I first started looking at courses, I found a different couple of ones. I was looking at, clothes making in general, but costume was really something that drew me in, and I really started to hone in on that and find a place to go, which is when I found Scarborough College, and it was run by Hull University, and I was really excited. I went for the interview, I went for the open days, and it's an hour and a half from where I live now, and yeah, it was nice to know that I could still hop on a train and be home within like an hour and see my family, which was a bigger bonus. So let's get into what it was like to be a costume degree student. So the first thing, it was hard, extremely hard. There was a lot to learn in a very short time. I still don't know everything there is to know about costume. I don't think you ever will, no matter how long you've been in the business. But for me, I'd done very little sewing before, and so it was quite a shock. It came to me because I had to do a full historical costume, including underwear with a corset and breeches, chemise, an underskirt, like a petticoat, the full costume itself on the outside, accessories, and a hat itself. I had to make the hat. So it was a lot to do within the first year, and we still had a group project to make a costume together in a group of 3 of us, and then we also had other classes to do along with that. So I know for a fact that it wasn't just me that struggled or found it hard. There were some people that were used to sewing and was like really light up for the challenge and go, and I was friends with some of those people, and it was great because what I didn't know, they were happy to help me and teach me, and so that helped me kind of have a bit more confidence and think, God, yeah, okay, we can do this. It was very much a thing of we can work together, and nobody wanted anyone else to fail. Nobody wanted that one person in the group to feel like they weren't doing, as well as everybody else. So that was a great thing. But the workload was hard, very hard to kind of get to grips to with when you've kind of had quite a slow pace. When I'd had quite a slow pace and like a steady kind of workload at college, going to university and it all been like, there, get that done. It was really hard to grasp. But I made it through eventually. But yes, I made it through, but the workload was very hard and not something you can just take on lightly. The next thing was exhausting. Another thing that we found that was you'd wake up in the morning early enough to, get a shower, get yourself ready for the day, and then you'd be hauling your little suitcase or those little granny trolleys. Because we had so much stuff that was heavy, we all ended up using like a suitcase or granny trolley to cart stuff around. So you'd be hauling that to college. So we'd be heading off to university, ready for all your lessons that day. Any free time that you had between lessons and between sessions, you were working on something, whether it was sewing, research, textiles stuff. Anytime you could have spare, you were doing something to further one of the projects that you're working on at the time. And then you'd go home, or you'd work late, you'd go home and you'd carry on working, and it was just very tiring. In my first year I didn't find it as tiring because I think I spent more of my time at home not working, or I'd just do certain things, like more relaxing things, whereas when it got into second year and the kind of heat turned up and you had more to do, I found it more exhausting because I realised that I needed to be on my game, I needed to be on top of everything, so I needed to use my time wisely, and that became tiring in itself. So within second year we had 2 historical costumes to make and 1 textiles type of costume to make, along with the other classes that we had and any other kind of like ongoing projects. And so it was really hard and intense and exhausting to kind of keep on track of everything, keep everything kind of moving. You literally, like, anything you could do to further one project, you would do it, even if it meant doing 1 stitch or 1 bit of research. You're like, at least it's moving me further to that end goal. And that's what it was like for, the whole course, really. Another thing, when you are a costume degree student, you have to be organised. I'm not terribly organised even now, and I wasn't then, but you really have to kind of, especially if you're doing quite an intense course like I did, you have to be organised and you have to know where everything is, what you need to be doing, what needs to be done, when it needs to be done for. You need to know when your materials are arriving, because that was one of the hardest things, was organising, ringing up, finding your material, getting them kind of approved by your tutor, ordering them, finding out when they were going to arrive, because if they were even a day late, that set your whole project back substantially, and that came with its own stresses itself. And because we're in Scarborough's quite a small seaside town, so it didn't have an abundance of shops and like places that you could go find materials, so there was very little that you could find, and even when you did find something, everybody else on your course would find it, so it was quite hard you had to kind of overbuy certain things that you thought you needed. Like calico was something we often used to make a mock-up or like a toile of something we were making, and you'd often just buy so much of that, so then you had it, so then if you do need it some more, you don't have to go and try and find it again, because you know for a fact that everybody else on your course is also buying that. So supply and demand was a hard thing to get around at that time as well. As well as being organised, I decided that from our first year going into our second year, we were told some of the projects we would be doing and some of the areas we would be working in. So that gave me time over summer. I sat and did a whole load of research. I did some sketches. I did all this kind of like research to understand the area that I was going to be working in, what they wore in that time, how it was constructed, what kind of materials they used, who was a queen, who was a king, who was important, what kind of social influence did they have at that time. And so I managed to kind of get myself prepped, ready for at least one of my projects that year, through the summer, ready for when we got started in September. Another thing is you've got to be ready to take criticism. If I'm a very soft person, I'm very like emotional, so even if somebody says one thing that's really like even slightly offensive or mean or something, I really get kind of emotional, I get upset, and I really find it hard not to cry. So this is something I found the hardest during the 3 years of university. It's not something I found easy at all, and I don't think many people do. But I think there was a lot of people on the course that could really just take it on the chin and move on with it, whereas there's also a lot of us on the other side that found it really hard and was like, had a mental breakdown. And I think because of the pressure of working on something for so long, and putting everything you had into it, for somebody to say even one small negative, you found it like the world just crashed down, and it was really hard to kind of recover from that. But thankfully, going home and eating a couple of mince pies or something like that made you feel a bit better. And living with friends really helped me, because then at least I had somebody to like talk it out with when I got home and kind of just make it feel a bit better. But yes, criticism is the hardest part for me. It's something that if you want to be in the costume industry, you've kind of just got to be a little bit hard-faced, and not that you have to be mean, but you just have to be prepared to like take the punch and then just get on with it. It's not something I was the best at doing. Especially like, so we got to do kind of some work experience, so you really got to see how people work, what's expected of you, how you'd work with people. Obviously you're working with actors who sometimes can be very particular, they can be very snobby, or they can feel like they're above you. Some of them are very much down to earth. It really depends on the person. Same with any other sort of like staff that you come across, such as directors, designers, things like that. You've got to really be able to work with people, and if they come with if for example the director has this dress in mind and this colour and everything, and you don't produce it exactly how they kind of think it's going to be, it can often be a kind of clash where the director then says you've not done it right, and because you're the costume maker, you have to then make it right. You have to work with them to make it how they want it. And that can be hard, especially because you can feel like it's a negative attack on yourself, but it's not. It's just, it's something you have to get over if you want to be in that industry. And you've also got to work out that not everything you do is going to be someone's taste. So you might find somebody who loves your work and has no negatives whatsoever. Just do what you want. You've got free reign, go for it. You might also then find somebody that has no idea how you work. They don't understand your rhythm, your look, aesthetic, nothing like that. And so you might find it a little bit more jarring, and a little bit more friction. But these are things that you'll come across, and it was something that I found the hardest, I think, was working out who liked what and how to approach them, how to do things right, how to talk to somebody. Sometimes that was one of the hardest things, was how to talk to somebody in a nice, calm way to find a solution to the problem. Another point is be ready to keep sewing until the very final point. Even at university, when you're in that time, you're literally running up to the very last minute before you've got to show your work off to the tutors and have it graded, and you've got to be prepared to really go the full mile till the very last second. We always had a sewing machine set up somewhere, and you had everything you would possibly needed to make a full costume right there in like a bag, just in case a button came off or a seam ripped or anything that you needed to fix. You could fix it right then and there and get the costume back out ready to be worn. My final thing about what it was like to be a costume degree student was you have to know to be adaptable. In my final year, I decided that I wanted to be a design student, but it didn't work out. So I ended up being a historical costume student, and I had to just quickly adapt. And the third year was my worst year for the whole course. I had a few personal issues, and so it didn't really help that I wasn't mentally in the game. So having to quickly adapt took me a bit longer than it should have done, but I got to it, I did it, and I was proud of myself in the end. I wish I'd kind of took that journey in the first place, but that's just how I was. And this is the same if you are going into the industry, and if you are wanting to do a historical costume course, you have to learn to kind of just adapt and go and make something work for you. You know, you might not have necessarily the whole tools on hand. You might be having to adapt a costume that's from one century into the next century, or, you know, even by a couple of years within the changes might happen. There's all these things that you have to kind of be able to just adapt something quickly and go and make it work the best you can. I hope you've enjoyed this little backstory of mine, and I hope this has helped you if you are looking into going into something like cosplay or costume making in any kind of aspect, whether it's historical or performance. I hope this has given you something to think about and maybe helped you decide if it's something you really want to do. Be sure to check out more of my videos. I'll leave links in the description. Thanks. Bye.